Well, what a difference a day makes. After all that wet, it really feels like the first day of spring today. And of course, everything is really pushing on now, so there's no time to be lost. Now, there are some vegetables that you can transform from stringy old cattle food into a real gourmet delight just by excluding the light from them. Now, this sea kale may not look much at the moment, but if you cover it with a pot with a little bit of slate on the top, or better still, one of these classy sea kale forces, then in about a month you'll be in for a real vegetable experience. You can do the same sort of thing at the end of the year with globe artichokes and, of course, right now with rhubarb. Earlier this week, Gardeners World visited a fascinating garden overlooking Dublin Bay, where gardener David Robinson has taken full advantage of this part of Ireland's relatively mild, but rather wet and windy climate to indulge his taste for the exotic.
Even though we're in the same latitude as Manchester here, many tender evergreen shrubs flourish, and this gives the whole place a rather subtropical atmosphere, even in the middle of winter. And this is because we are situated on a small peninsula, and so we benefit from the warm current of the North Atlantic drift. The main thrust of my gardening is to push tender plants to their absolute limit, and many of these would really need the shelter of a cool conservatory in most parts of Britain. Plants like, for example, the saw banksia from the warmer parts of Australia, with the attractive leaves having edges just like a saw blade. Other plants that do very well here are the echiums, particularly this one, which is an endangered species in its native Canary Islands. Now, interestingly, in this little woodland, the two main plants are self-sown birch from the tundra and self-sown echiums from the Canary Islands. And even though these two species are almost poles apart in their climatic requirements, they're cohabiting here very happily in this unique way. And then there is this very beautiful woolly-leaved Echium wilpretii, which is sending up its flower spike very strongly at the present time. Now, this plant is attractive at all stages, in the rosette stage, and more particularly when it's in full flower, with its rosy pink flowers arranged in this very interesting spiral formation. Two other closely related subtropical plants from Mexico are, first of all, this beschorneria and the century plant. Now, the century plant will take decades before it flowers, but the beschorneria can flower even as quite a young plant. Now, this is a rather handsome specimen in a peculiar sort of way. And of course, the flower spike will be about 8 feet long, covered with red bracts and fuchsia-like green flowers. Unfortunately, of course, for most people in Britain, it will be a conservatory plant. A mild garden provides great opportunities to exploit the magnificent diversity of the plant kingdom. But there's more to this garden than that. With the tendency for winters to become milder, it could be that many of the plants that grow outside in this garden today could well be planted more widely outside in Britain in the decades ahead, provided, of course, that the winter becomes just that few degrees warmer.
Well, just follow that. Well, of course, I can't here in the English Midlands, but in my greenhouse I do have some tender perennials of my own that hail from warmer climes. Now, this Nemesia has been flowering non-stop right the way through the winter, and it looks as though it's going to continue. There's another one here of a lovely soft pink, and that's got a trailing habit. Should look very good in a hanging basket. And the sutra too has been going on and on right through the winter. Now these plants will go outside at the end of May, but don't forget that now's the time to just pinch off the odd shoot here and there and make some cuttings of it, and they'll make very respectable plants by planting out time. I just wish all plants were that easy. Bergenias, or elephant's ears, can sometimes be quite accommodating. They tend to make these long rhizomes from the centre of the plant, and sometimes they will root into the soil. And when they do, all you've got to do is to take a sharp spade and just cut down there like that, dig the plant out, and you can see that that's got its own self-contained root system, so it'll get away quite well. But before I plant it, what I would do would be just to cut off the leaves like that. And so you can see you've got a nice new plant there that will soon get away. But it isn't always that simple. There are some bergenias, though, that seem to grow much more upright than the others, and they are very reluctant to root into the ground. You can see here how these rhizomes actually come right out from the centre, and none of them have rooted. So you've got to take a different course of action there. You just cut off a rhizome like that, and then if you just take away some of these little brown scales on the outside, and you should be able to see here and there a few buds. You can see there's one there and there's a good one there. And you can cut the rhizome up into pieces, about an inch long, I suppose, even less than that, provided it's got a bud on it. And then you put them into a seed tray containing 50-50 coir, compost and vermiculites, and you just have to make sure that the bud here is at the top. Put them in and just lightly cover them up like that, and they can go into a cold frame, and by next summer they'll have rooted and produced some quite nice new plants.
Less than 20 minutes drive from the splendour of Table Mountain is the township of Nyanga. It's home to over 100,000 people. It's perhaps the last place on earth you'd expect to find enthusiasm for gardening. But here, it's not flowers, but food that people are trying to grow. This vegetable garden is a pilot scheme set up by a group of local unemployed people as a self-help project. They're growing a range of vegetables here, like tomatoes, peppers and spinach. The soil is basically pure sand, and it's desperately dry during summer. But they've worked hard to incorporate organic matter into the soil to improve the growing conditions for their plants. And now, their first vegetable crop is beginning to push through.
Chris Zethu is the project's coordinator. Like many people here, he's never grown anything before, but they're beginning to find ways of beating the difficult soil conditions and the baking summer sun.
It looks quite vigorous. Imagine if you left it in, it would take over really quickly.
Yeah, so every day you must be early to do this work, every time. We've decided to irrigate in the morning session and then during the evening, twice a day, just to keep them at least water, because it's very dry here in the sand.
Are you finding the plants are responding to that?
Yes, I find them, because we thought these plants might die at any time, but we've seen that at least 1 month is gone and something is developing.
This is the Home Planter Nursery. It's one of only 2 in the black townships of Cape Town. It sells shrubs and bedding plants, but here too the biggest sellers are vegetable seeds and seedlings.
Almost all the vegetables, yeah. Spinach, cabbage, green peppers, eggplants, you name them. Almost all the vegetables. There was a problem that people are poor This was the idea, so that we educate them to grow something in their homes.
The first thing we're going to do then is look at the sun.
In another part of Nyanga, Betty Hanratty is demonstrating a kind of backyard allotment scheme, known here as door frame gardening.
Any other rubbish?
The system is totally organic and designed to use only materials that are free.
Today we've been with SANTA, the South African National TB Association, and they will spread the message through their field workers. They will go out and teach this community how to do this kind of gardening. We encourage them to form groups and share in the collecting of materials based on the Stockveld system that you found in South Africa, where people do already work together in groups for various reasons.
So they'll collect the organic matter and they'll separate out the rubbish and the useful materials.
Yes. And then all will take to one person's house this week, and then everybody will take to the next person's house next week, and so on.
The soil here just looks exactly like the beach. It's so sandy.
It was a beach. This was under the sea once. This was all sea, and this is also old sea sand.
Well, I can imagine this drying out in 2 minutes.
It does.
How on earth are you going to keep the water in the soil?
Well, for one thing, all that rubbish down in the hole tends to hold moisture underneath the ground. We teach them to recycle water. For example, the water they've rinsed their clothes in, they will use that for watering their gardens. We teach them to put a garden under their wash line so that the drips of the clothing will go onto the vegetables. The water they've cooked their vegetables in, all sorts of things like that, recycling water constantly. We're dealing with a very small space, and we can induce a microclimate, if you like, over a very small area, using very primitive things, whatever resources are available. I had specially dried some lawn clippings and mixed them with leaves, because that, for me, is the very best mulch. This is too green. You must never use
In this
green
heat,
mulch if you
mulch
can.
is essential.
Always use
The system
when it's
uses
dry.
whatever is to
I
hand,
mix it with
grass
leaves because,
cuttings,
you know,
even old newspapers and stones.
Okay. Now, there is a little rule we use about seeds. If a seed is that big, it only wants that much soil on top of it. If a seed is that big, it wants that much soil on top of it. Okay? You don't make them any deeper than their own size.
The seeds are planted immediately into what we'd recognise as more like a compost heap than a veg bed. There's no time to wait for the organic matter to rot down, but it works. Door-framed gardens usually last about 5 years before they need to be redug, and by making a succession of beds, it's possible to feed an average family. Some gardeners have grown enough food to sell their excess produce, making a little money to buy more seeds. For a few, it's been the start of a new business.
It's amazing how many people end up as business people through starting off as vegetable gardeners. I've had a few examples of that. Going from growing vegetables to owning a supermarket and not growing any vegetables anymore.
Well, I don't think I shall ever complain about too much rain again. Now, it seems a bit of a shame to be cutting these plants back hard when they're looking so beautiful at this time of the year, but it is absolutely essential. Now, these are willows, of course, and if they were left, they will grow into huge trees. But if you pollard them back every year, then they're really excellent shrubs, even for a small garden. And there's another reason for doing it too. These are grown for the colour of their bark, and it's the young shoots that have the most intense colour. So if you cut them back at this time of the year when they start growing, that'll give them the maximum chance to produce long shoots before the winter when they really come into their own. But I shan't throw these shoots away when I've cut them off. What I do is to put them in the ground around tall herbaceous plants like this, and then you tie the tops together like that and weave a few horizontal ones around as well and make a lobster pot plant support which will stop the tall stems falling over. Now, there are quite a few other plants that need pruning at this time of the year. Many plants that are grown for the colour of their young leaves, like this golden elder, and Acer flamingo is another one, are treated in exactly the same way. But you can see that this one is already beginning to shoot, so it really needs to be got at as soon as possible. And again, you just cut it back really hard like that. And if you'd like more of these plants, perhaps to give away to your friends, it's very easy to take hardwood cuttings. You just trim just below a leaf joint, and then just above it, like that, stick them in the ground, and they'll, like as not, root and give you lots more plants. And of course, you can get several plants out of the one shoot. When you're pruning roses, you need a good strong pair of gloves, and make sure that your tetanus jabs are up to date too. Now, it really is a much simpler job than a lot of people think. First thing you need to do is to look for a good strong outward facing bud that's going to grow out away from the centre of the bush. And it should be something like halfway down the existing stem, and then you just prune it off just above the bud, like that. Now, with thinner shoots, you can go even harder back to, again, an outward-facing bud, and that one is about 2/3 of the way down. If you can't find an outward-facing bud, then you can find a joint like that and prune to that, and you'll find that a good shoot should come out from that too. Now, it used to be recommended that all these thin shoots that will never produce flowers should be cut off. But it's now been found that the leaves on those shoots actually produce a food factory which will greatly improve the flowers on the shoots that are going to flower. So just leave them on. But of course, if you find any dead bits, then they should come off completely. These roses will look terrific when they're in flower, up against the background of my cordon apples and the beech hedge behind. But if you've just got a bare fence, then you've got a problem. Gay Search has the solution.
The problem this garden shares with lots of modern gardens is that it's shallow, it's much broader than it's long. And since your eye automatically travels the shortest possible distance unless there's something to distract it, what that means is the view from the kitchen window and the living room window here is more fence than you'd see at the Grand National. There's a lot of it, isn't there? Well, what we're going to try and do today is twofold. First of all, we're obviously going to try and hide the fence. But second, we're going to try and push the boundary back visually. And we're going to do that with colour. Bright colours actually foreshorten, they appear closer than they are. But pale colours and very dark colours have the opposite effect. They appear further away. And so here we're going to use lots of silvers, lovely smoky purples, pale pinks and so on. And this is what we need to do it. 1 Cotinus cogigria royal purple. 1 weeping silver-leafed pear, 1 Lavaterra Barnsley, 3 ivy Gloire de Marengo, 3 pink-flowered lavenders, 1 rose Felicia, 1 large purple-leafed phormium, 3 purple-leafed sage, and 3 lamb slugs. You'll also need 2 large bags of cocoa shells and some pelleted chicken manure. The first job is to measure the width of the bed along the fence and mark out the half-moon shape with a hose or washing line. Keep stepping back and checking to make sure the curve looks even. Then mark it with a spade before you scoop off the grass and start digging. This should take 2 to 3 hours, depending on what the soil's like. Well, now we've dug the bed over and dug in lots of cocoa shells to help improve the moisture retentiveness of the soil here, the next stage is to get the plants in. And first of all, of course, the climbers go in. Now, any huge expansive fence like this is just crying out for something growing up it. And we're going to use this lovely ivy. It's called Gloire de Marengo, and it has this lovely smoky grey, green and cream variegation. Now, ivy is a self-clinger, which means that it has aerial roots which will attach to a fence or a wall, so you don't have to do anything to help it once it's established, because it's only the new growth that has these roots. Until you've got some new growth, what you need to do is give it a bit of help. So put the cane in like this, up against the fence, just to point it in the right direction and get it started. And in the spring, once the new growth is there and is clinging, just whip the canes out. It should take about an hour to put all the plants in. Well, that's a bit more like it, isn't it? It's only 9 months since we planted this bed, but already most of the plants are just romping away. Look at this lovely Lavatera. It's almost as tall as me in just one season. And the really good thing about this plant is you can chop it right back to the ground in the spring and it'll grow this much again next year. So you'll have all this height, but it'll never get too big. And down in the front there, the lamb's ears, the lovely woolly stachys is growing well, and the purple sage too. That's really forming the carpet that we wanted it to do. And all I've got to do now is spread another mulch of cocoa shells. We did mulch it after we'd planted in the winter, but all that cocoa shell's broken down into the soil to feed it. So one more mulch and that'll give it protection from weeds, keep the moisture in and help the plants to grow. But of course it's still very early days for a newly planted border, and some of the plants are going to take a few more years to mature. This lovely inky smoke bush will take 2 or 3 years to fill its allotted space here, and the ivy will take roughly the same time to cover this fence completely. But I think you can already see how this lovely deep smoky purple and silver planting scheme has begun to achieve the effect that we wanted, and that's to make this fence disappear.
Of course, the great thing about buying plants is that they always grow in value, so Gay's border is money very well spent.
Travelling across the UK, delving into the cultural, architectural, historical, economic and pleasure-giving properties of Britain's native species. Tonight at 11, The Trees That Made Britain goes home. Next though, it's First Time Garden.